And I'd like to invite Councillor Will Foley to lead us with karakia.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everyone. And we'll start off with our normal karakia that everyone should know off by heart, and if not, open your apps quickly. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki toi, e aki ana te ātukura, e tio, e huka, e hauhu, si hei, Maori order.
Thank you, Will. Firstly, are there any apologies? Leanne?
There are none.
There are no apologies. There are no notices. Conflicts of interest declarations. Do any members have any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare for this meeting? Being none, move on to confirmation of the minutes of the Regional Council meeting held on the 29th of September. Circulated. Do I have someone who'd like to move?
Move.
Councillor Foss, Councillor Williams. Any discussion in the areas of emissions? None. I'll put the question. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. The Extraordinary Council. We don't move those minutes in this. We do that in the Extraordinary Council. Yes, the Extraordinary Council meeting held on the 13th of October. These have also been circulated. Good reading. But I have someone to move and second them, Councillor Van Beek and Councillor Foley, the two who moved the most resolutions on that day, so most qualified. Any questions, objections, amendments? Put the question. All those in favour will say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Follow-ups from the previous Regional Council meetings.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Chair, these have all been enacted or are under action. You'll just note there that in relation to the civil defence review that there is a desire to present that report to Council in a workshop before the 22nd of November, and that will just be subject to the availability of Council balancing a number of competing workshop demands at the moment, but happy to take any questions in relation to the follow-ups.
All right, any questions on the follow-ups? Councillor Curtin.
Just in regard to the civil defence report, is that available at this point in time? What's the status of it?
Yes, I'm happy to circulate the report to councillors. We had obviously hoped to bring the independent reviewer in to talk you through the findings, but until that has been scheduled, I'll take that as an action and circulate the report.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Well, councillors' information only?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that question. Is it a public document?
No.
It will be at the time that it goes to the Joint Committee on the 22nd of November, but it's not presently a public document.
It would be for the Joint Committee to release the public document, not individual councillors.
Really?
You're jesting with me already. Okay, any other questions on the follow-ups? Being none, we'll move on to significant organisational activities.
Chair, look, again, we'll take this as read, and we can take any questions that councillors have. I just do draw your attention to the complete list this month of the strategic projects and key business as usual programs. That gives an indication of the significant volume of work that's currently being undertaken that has arisen from this current long-term plan period. A number of new initiatives that came through the LTP you'll see underway there, but also a reasonably pervasive influence of COVID disruptions impacting on our delivery in key areas.
Okay, I'll take questions from my right to left. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, just a couple of questions. On the central catchments, item 14, asset management team could not gain agreement to build an access road for the extraction of gravel, looking into alternatives. What are the implications for funding commitments to the project, etc., if we don't find such an alternative?
Just checking that that's working. No?
Working.
It's working, excellent.
Does it just affect that cross section, or has it got?
Yeah, so that's on the Narararo, and so we've
Oh,
reduced
right.
the extraction in the Roy's Hill area and increased the extraction opportunities in those two cross sections. The challenge we had is we were unable to negotiate a reasonable deal on access, road access through to that particular area, and so there was some urgency around that road access. We still will be pursuing access, however, over the long term. So what it means is individual extractors are negotiating for access on an individual basis. So our approach was to negotiate an access that was available for all extractors to use, and that was a fair and reasonable deal.
That'll be sort of left to an individual basis too. Now the second question, is the last one, thank you, is Ahuriri Regional Park on the strategic projects, programming and reporting. There's a statement there that Three Waters may impact on that project. Can I just have a sense of how that might be the case?
Yeah, so that issue is currently with Napier City Council as the landowner, and they're doing some work with their council to understand, because there's provision for a significant stormwater detention and treatment basin, that they work through the details so that there's no unintended consequences down the track should the treatment be created. So Napier City Council is working through that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, perhaps just to be explicit. So the implication of the Three Waters reform is that the assets would transfer to the new entity, and so given that part of the new park is intended to be part of the stormwater solution, it starts complicating who's involved in this partnership, given that entity C will presumably now can be expected to be part of this project.
Councillor
Thank
Kirk.
you. Better asked.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go to item 14 under the strategic projects, that is the ecosystem prioritising process there. You've got coastal marine not allocated, but I thought we did have some allocated budget for that science report, or one science report.
So
confused.
through you, Chair, we did have budget for the report, and that's been presented to the last EICC. As the report had indicated, there's no budget for programs of work in the coastal marine area off the back of that report. That's why it's
There's
flagged
no
as red.
ongoing.
But it's something that's going to be addressed as the paper notes in the next long-term plan cycle. So we hadn't made provision for it in this long-term plan, but the proposal is to bring that back in the next long-term plan.
So Chair, we'll take this offline and report back on this at a later date. I have a slightly different view about the, I guess, the status of this one, in so much as the Kotahi plan change is reviewing the Regional Coastal Environment Plan. The science that's been undertaken around priority ecosystem sites in the coastal marine area will inform, and the science team is informing the Kotahi project, and I would expect to see increased levels of protection of biodiversity coming through the Regional Coastal Environment Plan review. So there will still be work ongoing between policy and planning and our science team to give effect to some elements of that, but we don't have substantial funding to undertake further biodiversity protection enhancement outside of the regulatory framework.
Mr. Chair, just following up on that, that was my understanding in those discussions on the LTP, was that there was quite a significant cross-pollination of the various processes, if you like. Kotahi was one of those. Is it possible for the next report to actually reflect the crossover between other ongoing activity?
So whether it's the next significant activities report in a month or a more substantial report, we will come back to you on that question.
Yes, and perhaps, Chair, I was just going to add that what we might try and do is cover it off in a paper we bring to EICC that pulls together a more fulsome view of all of our biodiversity-related activities across the business, because this was very much focused on
Yeah.
physical investment in the coastal marine space rather than policy work.
Thank you.
So your answer is yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Done. Michael? Mike?
I had, so one of them, a couple of them have been already dealt with, Mr Chairman. So one was just in regards to the Head of Tonga Plains Scheme review, number 12 and 13. It's just making sure that we are engaging with mana whenua along those waterways. It's just important that we keep them in the loop and keep touch. That'll potentially head off any issues that may develop further on down the track. They feel they're not being consulted. Just along those lines, Mr Chairman.
Thank you. Point well made. Craig?
Thank you. Point 16, CCTV cameras are now installed at Waitangi Regional Park. That's great. Can you just inform us as to who monitors those? And that is a general policy for us to have CCTV cameras wherever possible. And presumably there was a budget line to install those.
Yeah, so to answer that, so there is budget provision was made in the last LTP to expand CCTV in problematic areas and other operational areas for operational information. So that's kicked off. We have an agreement with Hastings District Council, who currently monitors those and can take the footage and provide that to either ourselves or police for certain matters that need to be followed up.
Great. Thank you. Also, probably Chris, again, just 14, the Tutera logging. I'm just a wee bit intrigued. I know we have forests, that we own forests, but there's just a commercial element to this, which is a bit curious to me because it talks about logging is resuming at Tutera Regional Park. I guess it's our park, but then we go and log prices has fallen and it's all about the commercials of it. So is that what drives this, or should someone else make decisions in and around the commercial risks?
So there's several parts to that. Several years ago, we entered into a major contract with PanPac for our forests that needed to be logged because they are at the due date of being logged. As part of that, I think we look at those variables to make sure it is a good commercial decision to maximise our return, and those decisions are currently made within the particular project by our forestry manager. So we have a dedicated forestry manager who also has consultancy resources to lean on, plus the expertise of PanPac, and they work to make the best decision for this organisation.
And do those decisions reference our treasury and investment policies?
So I'd need to get back to you on that detail.
Well, could I just respond to that? We did have a long discussion, I think, while it preceded your time, Craig, where we went through how we managed the forest, the pricing, who did the cutting, etc. And it's a complicated, series of things, but we went through that and we came with what I thought was a pretty practical sort of arrangement, how the decision tree would work, knowing that it had to be cut at some stage. We left too long was the problem, taken too early a problem, cost of roads, etc. So there is a lot of work that's been done.
Yeah, sure. No, I understand that. But we didn't have a treasury policy back then either. So it's just trying to link the two. It's a significant item on our balance sheet. Just another question. Hey, the strategic projects and key BAU program reporting, that's a great table. Thanks for putting that one together. Just a quick question about number 7, where it talks about the Tuki plan and the 2-tier end-loss risk matrix developed. Is that to get over the uncertainty in around overseer? So from a council's perspective, are you hopeful, I'm sure you are, that that will help get the various plans and consents through?
Katrina can answer this one.
Yes, it is in response to overseer not being able to be used. The team have worked with the sector to develop a risk matrix so that we can continue our consenting strategy in those catchments.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor
Chair.
Worsley.
I think the only gap I have really to ask about is within the Regional Water Security Program. There are 2 projects there. I see. Is there going to be an addition of the regional water assessment added to that?
So
So the regional, yes, we'll be bringing the regional.
We'll be bringing a first cut of the regional water assessment to a workshop, hopefully in November. In terms of the reporting, so you're looking at the traffic lights or the...
Yeah, the traffic lights, yeah.
And which number?
So
Up to-
2.
Chair, look, I think we can just add it into
Yep.
the next report. Yeah.
All right,
Cheers.
Yep.
Councillor Lambert.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, I agree that the PMA reports are really good, and I'm particularly interested in item 16 about the flood control at the Wairau River Parade erosion. In the comments you talk about cultural impact assessment being done. Does this also pass on to the Maori Standing Committee and or the RPC, Regional Planning Committee? Was it nearly finished?
So in terms of the cultural assessment, that's part of business as usual for many projects we do. We wouldn't normally bring that information to either the RPC or the Maori Standing Committee. But we have provided briefings and updates of the projects and the activities involved.
Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry.
Look, I was going to suggest that if there's a request for the CIA to be circulated, we'd be more than happy to do so. Yeah.
Just one more question is who writes it? Who conducts the assessment? Internal or external?
No, external.
External.
No, so it was done by the
Mana whenua.
by Mana Whenua through the reserves arrangement up in Wairau. So we can provide that we can circulate that. Yep.
Kia ora, Mr Chair, I'll be able to speak to this just to fill in Councillor Lambert a bit more on the cultural impact assessment, if that's okay.
I think we just agreed that we'll circulate the cultural assessment to Councillor Lambert to read it for himself.
Have I just explained to him who were involved in it,
No, sure.
and he
There you go.
simply have no issue. Kia ora, Charlie. So that cultural impact assessment was completed by myself as a technical writer and historian, and Hera Huata, with her background in atuatanga whakapapa the other one was Tatarina Kawana, so she did a Maori monitor report, and we engaged with quite a few of the mahinga kai practitioners during whitebaiting season over the last few weeks, and that culminated in a report on that as well, and it was within the Wairoho Ninganinga area. We established Mana Whenua. I spoke about sites of significance, and yeah, it's quite a lengthy document. I think it's over 100 pages. So yeah, welcome for everybody to read it. And if there's any questions, we're happy to answer. Kia ora.
It does bring up a question, is this cultural assessment particularly on a project or on the river as a whole? Because I
On the
understand we have a
project.
couple of flood areas.
To do with the sheet piling, so the retaining wall, sheet piling retaining wall for the Huon River Parade with the erosion there around the ferry, more in front of the tui, and how that would impact on the awa and the mahinga kai areas there, as well as any sites of significance. But the other thing is that it's also where our infrastructure is, Charlie, so that's needed for the community. So there were offers of help with the cultural side of things as well. So yeah, it's all in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Van Beek.
Yeah, similar question to what Craig had on Lake Tatura logging, or Tatura Park logging. The other one I have is in number 12 in the traffic light regarding the erosion control scheme. There seems to be capacity and capability issues, but the traffic light doesn't actually show that. So can you just explain to me what actually the issues are? And we understand this is hugely oversubscribed. Are we not able to meet our requirements?
So in terms of capability capacity, I think that's reflected in the risks being EMBA. So at the moment, we are able to meet demand, but it's just taking longer to get to projects than we would otherwise like. In terms of meeting our obligations, we're being very careful not to agree to and contract projects that we know we're unable to deliver because of capability capacity shortfalls. All of that is not resulting in a slowdown in the program though. So we're still able to deliver the projects and the products, just the timeframes are extending a little bit. And we're having to be a little bit sort of smart about how we, the projects that we pick to make sure that we know that we can match products and supplies and people to them rather than taking on projects we know we're not going to be able to deliver on.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions under strategic projects. First one, the right tree, right place. So the risk there is around the shortage of seedlings and limited availability. So there is a local nursery business that's looking to do quite a considerable expansion, and just wondering if we can perhaps get HBRC to get in amongst exactly what that expansion looks like and see whether our strategies can align around what it is exactly we require and what it is that they may be thinking of producing out of the nursery.
Certainly, Councillor, happy to talk to you about that offline and just get some more detail. Yeah, it's going to be an ongoing problem in terms of seedling production and supply.
Thank you, Ian. And second question, under strategic projects number 16, flood control with the Upper Tuki. So could I just have those couple of risks there elaborated a bit? So one is market engagement. Exactly what do you mean by that? And the second one is achieving targeted extraction volumes within the allocated budget.
So there's two lines there, and I think that you're focused more on the Upper Tuki gravel extraction. So on that, we have had a slight delay at the request of industry, and that was to respond to the tendering process. But the current advice is we will have tenders out by the end of November. And that represents 120,000 cubic metres of additional extraction. In addition to that, under business as usual, we have, just looking at the numbers here, 289,000 cubic metres of river gravels have been consented since July 21 under our business as usual. So that is significant, but there does remain risk around the market, and the other thing, I guess, we're doing with this particular proposal is short-term consents. So they're three-month consents. So extractors can't bank material that they have a consent for but don't take. So if the material isn't taken in 3 months, it'll be reconsented to someone who can. So that's how we're trying to build some mitigation into some of those risks.
Jacqueline.
Thank you, Chair. So this is probably for you, Ian. Number 14, ecosystem priorities again, same as Councillor Curtin. So, but over the terrestrial, I'm just interested in clarification about the internal and external stakeholders for the 700 ecosystem prioritisation. Just, yeah.
So, sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, 14, well, you have to go into the project summaries.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, down the bottom.
Apologies.
Okay, sorry, I'll just find that. Right, and you mean in terms of who are we working with? Okay, so look, there's a range of partners across the program. There's Department of Conservation, QE2 National Trust, the funders in terms of the Crown, the landowners. Those are probably the main parties, or Landcare Trust, So there's a range of people, and it really depends on the site. Some sites it might just be ourselves and the landowner. Some sites it may be big enough and significant enough to bring in QE2 National Trust as well. What we've done is taken an approach to try and leverage in as many parties with funding as possible to these sites, so that we're all co-investing in the same sites but at a lower level than we would do on our own. That's sort of the mantra that we've applied to these projects generally.
Yep, thanks.
All right, I'll go to the wall. Up here. No, he's not there. He is. Yep. You're cool. Michelle, any questions?
Just about the Ahuriri estuary, I've just got to ask, been coming up the bay over the last couple of weeks, especially in holidays with my children and my husband, and I'm noticing how pedo the wetlands are by the airport.
Smelling.
As you're coming, yeah, it's rotten.
Yeah.
It's rotten. It's bubbling. Yeah, it smells like sulphur.
Yeah.
And it's changing colour like last summer. And for the words of my husband, who's Ngāti Pāro, mamai to see. And just want to give my hononga some sort of indication as to what's happening about that.
Chair, I
What's causing
don't think we can give an answer on the spot, but we're happy to come back and provide a response.
I can say that those are lands controlled exclusively by DOC.
That's true.
The airport has no responsibility for them. They've carved out the wetlands, DOC. So DOC would be answerable for them, and I would suspect it's an entirely natural process.
That's something which I think we can ask for our marine science team to provide some advice on.
Do that. Okay. Any
Why
other
is it
questions?
changing colour? Thank you.
All right, I've got a couple of questions. Just on the, just here we are. 11, tank plan. When it says in here, budget currently sitting at 4.5 million, it's a big number. What does the 4.5 million represent?
So, off the top of my head, I believe it's the policy and planning costs. I don't believe it includes all of the science costs to date, but I might be wrong on that. The build of the Hiritonga groundwater model, etc., I think was a $2 million, 2.5 in of itself. So I think the total science spend will be on top, probably, of that 4.5. But yeah, certainly of the policy and planning process, and the formal hearings, etc.
So what do you estimate the hearing costs to be so far?
Well, look, I know that they're in excess of $1 million.
And climbing.
They're not all in. They're not all in yet, but
No.
about $1 million.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
it's still going,
It's
obviously.
still going.
Just want to note the cost we're paying at the end of this. The last one is the Ahuriri Regional Park. I see in the work here it's got Napier City Council and us working together. But there's no mention of Mana Ahuriri. Why is that?
There's reconnect.
There is.
Yeah, so we're in the formulation stage. They're definitely in the picture. The current piece of work is to provide a good structure and protection around the land tenure. Once that is resolved, we'll be building the framework around the project and assessing a wide variety of partners and stakeholders and how they should be involved. So that work is still to come in detail.
Okay.
Can I also add to that, Chair? Just within our working group, there were 3 Mana Ahuriri representatives around that table, just in case you thought they were missed out.
Well,
Was that part of the question?
that's exactly the question.
Yep.
Is that I see Napier City Council, I see Regional Council, I do not see Mana Ahuriri, and I would have thought they should have been first on the list,
They were in there.
So,
not missed off the list.
point taken. We'll revise that. They absolutely should be. And in all of our external comms, we've been consistent about them being a key partner. I just think it's just an oversight in terms of the way that project's been described.
Thank you. We're now to the recommendation. Would someone like to move the Hawke's Bay Regional Council receives and notes? I said it's through to November 2021, so we're doing it in advance here. We'll do it to the 27th of October.
I'm happy to do it on that basis.
27th of October, this is today. All right. Councillor Van Beek. Procedural motion, there's nothing to debate in this, is there?
No, I did want to comment though. Once
Oh,
I
you
didn't
can
have a
do it.
question. I just wanted to comment on
Sure.
something I didn't know. It's just the on-demand is listed on schedule basis as off track. I have assured myself through discussions with Katie Nimmin and Katrina that everything is being done in a COVID world to ensure that the procurement isn't any more than it needs to be in terms of a delay. I've just actually gone and walked into one of the buses that we are likely to be procuring for this purpose, and it's exactly what we want and need, but the realities are what they are at the moment. So I didn't ask a question about that. It's not because I'm not alive to it. I am, and I'm being briefed on it, and I'm grateful to the team for that. Can I just talk what Michelle said? I was at Napier Airport last night, and it absolutely reeked of sulphur. I've never smelt that in this region before. There is a pervasive problem. I don't know where it's originating from, whether it's the estuary, the wetlands, or what, but we do need to look into it.
Okay, any other comments? I'll put the motion. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. Call for minor items.
Oh yes, I have one, Chair.
You'll have?
Communications.
Comms. Okay. Councillor Foley.
Peka Peka Swamp.
Peka. Yeah. Any other?
Yep.
Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, the right to vote on for multiple owned land.
Yeah. Any other? Done. Right, we now move to the next item. HBRC representation arrangements review. Who's going to lead this paper, James?
Thank you, Chair. Look, we won't talk through the paper because it's obviously a long and complicated paper, but Council has been well appraised of these issues through a number of workshops, and obviously the consultation that we've undertaken, the hearings that Council has held. So it's now a decision point. There's been much discussion, obviously, on these matters, and there are a range of choices set out for Council. Given the interdependence between the various decisions that flow on, it was a challenging paper to construct, and I just commend Leanne in particular for her navigation of that, which has not been straightforward. But we have set out the paper in a manner to assist you in making those sequential decisions, and hopefully what is the most logical manner. Leanne has tabled some paper versions of the potential amendments to those recommendations, just to assist you in working through that, because we don't have our usual flexibility with technology to put a live set of recommendations up on the screen to work through. So happy to take any questions, Chair. Otherwise, we can move to some decision making.
All right. Well, let's try this a little bit as we should. I think I'll take questions first, just questions. Then we might look at some comments. Then we get some comments. We then might move to a decision hierarchy. So, questions, and they begin with a question word.
I've got a question.
A question, certainly. Thank you.
Is the question word? Is there any option for the Wairoa Ngāti boundary to be some form of hybrid between what is notified and the current? Or are we in a binary choice position given timelines and the subsequent steps that need to be followed?
There's two answers to that. James, where you go?
Well, I see Leanne's coming forward as well. She's grabbed the microphone. Look, the general principle would be that if it's a relatively minor variation over what's been consulted on, you're at liberty to make changes. If you're fundamentally changing the proposition, then you put in jeopardy, I guess, the quality of the consultation that's occurred, because you would be going down a different avenue to what those submitters had understood to be council's proposal. So, Leanne, is there anything you want to add supplementary to that?
Just to say it's not binary, it's not one or the other. We did earlier on consider an option to take the boundary only as far as the Esk River, I think it was. So that's an option that we might consider as well.
Yeah.
All right?
The two answers are, first, the really dry perspective is that you can only have an up and down on what you've consulted on. And if you were going to make a variation of any significance, you should have 2 rounds of consultation, because people would deny the option to voice their opinions on the variation. The more liberal other end of the spectrum is, as long as it's within the range of issues.
My question was really one within the range. Is there an option?
So if it's in the range, then you are able to do so. And I would suggest that if it was a view to make a variation within the range, that would be acceptable as far as I was concerned as chair, because there is a second level of decision making after this. So if we got it completely wrong, there is, if you like, an appeal authority, because we have to put this through to the Representation Commission for them to make a decision. So it's not the end of the road. Okay, Craig.
Thanks. Why, James, under the consultation, because you've said you didn't want to talk about the paper, but actually I do, Federated Farmers raised a very good point in their written and oral submission and around the information available for people submitting, the details of the numbers, which is, most of this paper is around numbers to and fro in the various wards, and yet our consultation paras 7, 8 and 9 are blind to that. They don't mention nor comment on it, but they do reference other submissions throughout the paper. So why has that not been included? And as you may recall, I raised the same point early on in this journey.
So through you, Chair, to clarify, I'm very happy to talk about the paper. I don't think I said that I didn't want to talk about the paper. I'm happy to talk about the paper. I just felt that the paper spoke for itself. In relation to paragraphs 7, 8 and 9, we've set out the process steps that were undertaken, nearly all of which, in terms of the public advertising, was drawing people to our website, where there was the detailed information, including the numeric breakdown of the various different proposals in relation to the electoral boundaries. I'm satisfied that there was the full information available to those that wanted to go and find it. Recognise that with all the consultations there is always a range of views as to whether we've provided enough through enough channels for enough people to know. But certainly through the combination of the public notice, the media release, the social media, Hawke's Bay Today advertisements and emails to targeted submitters, I'm satisfied that those with a strong interest in representation matters around the regional council could reasonably expect to have been alerted to this consultation, and the information was available to them.
Yeah, thanks, James. And yeah, look, most of that I agree with. The point is, as you said at the start, you had to tunnel down for those that wanted to find some of the detail, and the discussions which will follow this are about detail. So, and they made the point of comparisons to Hastings District Council, similar consultation. But anyway, that's now done. Can I just ask another question? How many submissions were received? The reason I ask, Para 10 talks about 36 written submissions were received and accepted. The table below, the breakdown, if you add up the number of submitters there, says 32. And so that throws those percentages out. So what is the number that would have been used to form the paper? 36 or 32 or something in between? Because
so,
yeah, sorry.
Defer to Leanne on that one. There's total of 36
so
accepted.
Says 36. The table below, if you add those 4, 11, 5, 1, 9, 2, comes to 32. So, and then that drives the percentages on the right-hand side. So I just don't know what the correct number is. I'll repeat it, you just say it.
Sorry.
Push the switch all the way out.
All the way up. The correct number is 36. The reason some of those other numbers don't add up to 36 is because they were on different criteria. It wasn't that they were not received.
It doesn't make sense to me. So, not different criteria. This is how many submissions were received on the representation review.
So there was 36 submissions received.
36.
There's the table below, which references, if you add those numbers up, where it says number of submitters, total there is 32. You haven't put a total on, but if you add them up, you get to 32. So I'm not sure where they're missing.
The breakdown of constituencies where submitters are registered to vote,
Yeah.
that's because 2 of them were on behalf of organisations that were not registered.
That still only comes to 32. So look, there's obviously an error in the table if 36 is the correct number. And it might be that more than 2 were not specific to constituencies.
Perhaps they weren't from Hawke's Bay. The answer, I'm not particularly fussed, 36, 34. I worry that it's such an important issue, the analysis is not as robust as we'd like. I mean, everyone makes errors. There's numbers flying around everywhere here, I understand that. But this is the document which we use to inform ourselves and the public, and it is not correct, I don't think, or neither of us understand it. So it's not going to change now, but there seems to be an error.
There's an arithmetic error, accept that.
There is.
And so I hope, therefore, that everything, all the other analysis is, there aren't errors in there.
Okay.
So through you, Chair, can I just check with Leanne, is the information at hand that could provide the answer to the question, which is if the full number of 36 were included in the table, where would those be distributed to?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I'll find that right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, because even the table of percentages adds up to 102%. You add the numbers up on the right-hand side.
But having said all that, I don't think it's going to be a material point on which will change.
No. No, it's not. It's just the flavour of
I get
my
that.
frustration with the process.
Yep. Councillor Lambert.
Just a quick question. The NA, is that talking about Federated Farmers and Mount Haruru Tangitu Trust, is that not applicable?
Just so their submissions are valid, it was just that they're not applicable in terms of you wouldn't assign them to a particular constituency because they were representing the region or multiple constituencies.
So what we should have had instead of NA, it should have been region-wide submissions, and that would have been 2. So what's the matrix has been done on the basis of having submissions and assigning them to particular constituencies, and so therefore there were 2 which were a general thing, so it didn't fit the constituency part, so it should have been region-wide. They would have put 2.
They each represent a whole lot more than 32 members.
That's right.
Mount Haruru Tangitu is a PSG.
Yeah,
they clearly represent people. Yeah.
It's just the way it's described, excuse me. Unfortunate choice of words. Okay, any other questions? Councillor Foley?
Yeah, just first question to Leanne, or if she's busy I can always ask James, but the submitters proposed a possible scenario that if we accept the northern and southern Māori wards and shift the Wairoa boundary south, there could be no representative from the Wairoa community. So I just wanted to confirm, is that a definite scenario that could happen?
So technically that's possible, but you would obviously have to have a large number of Wairoa voters voting in favour of a candidate that doesn't live in the Wairoa district for that to occur, because the majority of votes will still reside.
But could be split between multiple candidates up there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so my next question is, we're all voted in by our particular constituencies. Once we're voted in, we represent all of the Hawke's Bay region, is that correct?
No, that's not quite right. You are elected by a constituency, and then when you assemble as a group, you are expected as a group to work for the interest of the region.
Okay. So my final question, and I'll try and ask this the best I can, James. In your experience through us that sit around this table, councillors, that with our, I guess, local, from where we come from, our local knowledge and our local relationships, is there generally the situation where we tend to focus on local issues, from where we come from? Does that make sense? As a generalisation.
So look, I think what we experience typically from councillors is a mixed focus on representing local community interests within their constituencies and bringing those matters forward. And I think where there are specific local issues, we typically do see those come from councillors that represent those communities. But obviously a significant amount of council's business is region-wide and relates to, policies and services, etc., that apply to everyone in the region, and so councillors do spend a significant amount of their time considering matters that are relevant to other parts of the region, not just the ones that they represent. So a bit of both is, I think, if that answers your question.
I think I'd put it just slightly differently in that my experience is that councillors will bring issues to the table out of their representative function. And for that, I think of gravel. But when it comes to a decision-making process, it is a rare thing for a councillor to lean heavily on their constituency with preference to taking a regional type view of the decision. So when things are here, for example, rates in the big picture, councillors tend to look at it from a regional perspective and make a regional decision, having been brought to the table individual issues out of their constituency.
Yeah, I guess where I'm trying to get to is, is there a risk if we didn't have representation in a particular area such as Wairoa District, which is rather large, is there the risk that we lose a lot of focus on that district that does still need, from an environmental point of view, still need a large amount of our focus?
Well, that'll be, I don't know that anybody can answer the question for you. I think that's something that you're going to have to weigh up in your decision making as to when it comes to about the decision with particular reference to Wairoa. So that's how you'll weigh that up. And it'll be your political judgment will be that. Okay, you've got a question, Councillor?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chief.
Thank you.
That line of questioning, I enjoyed that. Can I
That's
ask,
not a question, that's a statement.
I'm still going to say it though. Mr. Chair, could I ask the Chief Executive, or possibly Ian, to help me out with submitter 16.2, paragraph 16.2, and that's the submission from Federated Farmers, where it's stated that the predominant extensive sheep and beef farming land uses, steep terrain, unique resources, management issues and solutions, connections to Wairoa as the main town, as the rationale for a limited Wairoa constituency. Can I get some comment about the catchment and land use and terrain and resource management issues from the Esk River upwards, including to Tira? Are there particular or similar land use, terrain, resource management issues from the Esk River up to Wairoa?
I think the short answer is yes. It's certainly a common mix of land use between plantation forestry and relatively rolling to steep sheep and beef farming, with the same set of issues around sediment in particular.
The terrain is steep hill country, coastal hill country. The land use is sheep and beef in the main, with forestry interspersed.
Yep, certainly.
And the resource management issues for the catchment and river issues are similar. across from Estar right through to Tira. Sorry, to
Look, I think from Esk to the Waikato River, that's broadly true. I think one of the points possibly that is made frequently around Wairoa's land use issues is they are a bit distinct from the Heritonga Plains or the Rui Taniwha Plains or southern coastal Hawke's Bay, where there are still sediment issues, but there are different land uses as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
And just to follow up, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, in terms of resourcing and catchment management in the zone to the north of Napier from Bayview on, would it be fair to say that we are investing very heavily council resources in that zone to the north of the region?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I think that the observation I'd make is that we can service the Esk to sort of probably the Waikato River or thereabouts from Napier in terms of staff to a large extent. But obviously once we get up into Wairoa, it is important for us to have our Wairoa-based staff. The travel times are significant to the northern Wairoa parts of the region. So there is a distinction, if you like, in terms of management units for us between Wairoa and I guess those parts of the northern part of the current Ngāraroto constituency.
We're going to
Chair, perhaps just also that we have specific Crown investment up on the Wairoa catchment through the Hill Country Erosion Fund as well, which is about $5.4 million that doesn't apply to the balance of the region.
So in total, Mr. Chair, going to Councillor Foley's perspective, that our management of the catchment and resource application is beyond equitable. In fact, is the investments we're making in that zone from a council resourcing perspective have not been compromised by only one representative in that zone.
Fair enough. I'm really keen to, I know time's ticking on, but I'm really keen to get to the decision making sometime. Any other questions you've got, Councillor? You? Councillor Foss?
One more question from me before the comments, sir.
Yeah.
Chair. Just to James, does the paper start with an assumption that areas of interest are best served by councillors who live in that area of interest? Or constituency?
So in order to validly stand for a constituency, you need to be nominated by persons who have lived in that constituency. So I guess some support from that local community, and ultimately, a successful election is premised on somebody representing that community. And so that community would have to feel that they identify with that individual and they feel that that individual does indeed represent their interests. So, while legally they don't have to live there, I think there is a presumption that representatives represent the community in which they are domiciled by and large, or are proximal to, or have an affinity or a connection to.
Thanks very much.
It's not always the case. You have a very good example of a Prime Minister of New Zealand who lived in central Auckland and represented a constituency in West Auckland.
Did it very well.
It was the people who chose and made their own decision. Councillor Robinson.
I just question the assumptions.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to thank all the submitters who contributed towards helping us make this decision, which isn't easy. And we know that the Local Electoral Act has its flaws, but we decided to engage on this process, and the foundation being that we create 2 Māori constituencies, or one. So that's the basis in which I started this journey, really. And then we went into workshops. So the question, I'm getting to the question, Chair. When we engaged in workshopping, maybe Leanne, you can remind us in terms of the Wairoa border, moving or not moving, what was the other scenario we looked at for moving that south? Can you just briefly explain what that looked like and why we looked at that other option?
in the interests
Go on.
of, is it working?
Yep.
In the interests of looking at what options were considered, and not only through the workshops but also through the papers that I did bring through to the councillors for consideration, we considered that trying to get to an option that was closer to the plus or minus 10%. We staff did look at how far we would need to bring the border in order to get, up to around 10,000 people, but that extended beyond the boundaries of Flaxmere, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the way the population is spread across the province. Anyways, the other option that we did consider was bringing the boundary just to just north of the Esk River, so not including the whole of the Esk Valley. And I'm not sure whether that's why council decided to go with the fuller extent, was because it got you that much closer, and why would you take part of a valley and not the whole? But that was the other option that was put forward.
Thank you.
Does that
Right,
answer?
thank you. Look, I'm keen to get on to the discussion. Yeah. Charlie?
Oh, well, I move the motion.
Go for it.
Which ones? Which ones?
I just
brave man.
I just thought if we go, you've got the motions here. I'm not entirely happy about the sort of the way in which they're written, but I just think we can take them as we work our way through that. Recommendations 1 and 2 that receives the report, agrees the decisions are significant, acknowledges consultation. That's a simple one. I think we can all agree with 1 and 2. And then we will then come to the 3 or the 4, and we then make a decision about that. Then we come to 5 and 6, and then we come to 7 and 8, and we kind of work our way down through it. We then cascade our way down through it rather than do it all in one hit. Does that seem like a fair enough deal?
Just comment, are you looking for separate debate on each of the...
I thought we'd made those separate motions on the way through. So we each know, all in one chunk would be too complicated. So would some like to move...
You said there were questions, comments, and then go through the decision items.
Yeah.
So you've changed that?
Well, kind of, because the questions of... Would you like to make a couple of comments?
Well, I just walked throughout the paper. I'm just trying to get the journey of travel.
Yeah, well, I'm getting to... I'm just... Before we get to the comments, I just want to make sure that we're clear. I intend to have a cascade of resolutions. Piece after it.
I'm fine with that. I just...
Yeah.
Right at the end, I'm not sure, under the debate of seconding the particular motion, etc., somewhere comments may get lost.
Yep.
Because there's going to be 29 of them or something.
Yeah, no, so if we do it that way, cascade decisions, some of them are straightforward, like 1 and 2. I presume that would be pretty straightforward. So before we go to that, I just thought I'd go around the table and invite councillors to, if they want to make any comments before we enter that process, the general thing. So we therefore get that out of the road, and then we go down to the specifics. I think it would save a lot of time. Okay? So we're happy with the structure of the decision making. We'll then go and I'll go from left to right, inviting comments, and I'll start if anybody have any comments you'd like to make in general about the paper before we move on to the decision making. Jacqueline.
Thank you, Chair. Just my comment is, clearly I was not present for a lot of these workshops that Haniwai has mentioned. So I've needed to read thoroughly these papers and any other information available to really get an idea. One statement I would like to make, having recently campaigned for the Hastings constituency, I live 1 minute from the boundary and I am not in the Hastings constituency. I know this doesn't seem relevant, but my statement is perhaps a whole review of the constituencies, and perhaps you've spoken about it, but I wasn't present, should have been made instead of one. Thank you.
You? Councillor Foley.
Just in general.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's been a long journey to get to today. some heartache, a lot of joy. And so just thank everyone that's, put the work in to get to here, and particularly all the submitters on Māori wards, firstly, and then on our latest process around representation. So just thanks for everyone to get to this point, and yeah, I guess we'll just continue to make comments on the particular points as we go through. So,
Mr. Chair, just to be clear on process, Council is not, the grantee issue in here is the Wairoa Ngāra rural boundary. In this round of general comments, are we not going there? Are we holding back on that topic, or do we get it? Do we comment on that? I'd rather do it all, anything I've got to say on all of them. Yeah.
All right, well,
then we can come through and we kind of...
I just thought people would like to have some comment about the process. We've got some general comments, and we then get to the the crunchy points with me. So that's Councillor Van Back.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and once again, thanks to the submitters. I thought there would be more, so that may have had something to do with process and how we actually made it quite clear that actually we were going through this consultation process. Overall, I must say that I've always taken a view what's best for Hawkesbury Regional Council and for our area, and making sure that we have consistency right across. There are a few decisions that we have made that I didn't entirely agree with, but I think we've landed as one council. We've still got one more decision to make, Charles, and that's where that boundary is going to be between you and me. But we hopefully will get there, and wisdom will prevail. Thank you.
Councillor Lambert.
I don't know if wisdom's got anything to do with myself. I just with the process, I realised it was all about the Māori wards at the start, and that's what we consulted on and talked about. But Martin's right, it quickly turned and it's something else. When we're talking about the Māori wards, if anybody didn't really need that rule, it was Wairoa. Because we actually had we were ahead in the electoral rules, as far as Māori's concerned. And I'm living proof of that. But the people at Wairoa wanted it to be a fair system for everybody. So they actually agreed to it. And the other thing is, and it's something that one of the submitters said at one of the first hearing we had, and she said that every child has a right to see him or herself reflected in the leadership of their community. And that one stuck with me all the time. And it's not only applicable to Māori, it's applicable to any community. So with this process, I think we did concentrate, and that consultation process went really well. We went out to all the districts and stuff. But at the end of it, we had the one lot of submissions last month, or a couple of weeks ago. And the pathway had definitely changed. And I think we were led down a path which just steered us into the face of the inevitable. We're only ever going to get 2 seats. And I think all our Māori people knew that, but it's the price you pay for getting progress, I suppose. No one likes that 2 seats at all. And at the basis of it, I look back on Maunga Hareru Tangi 2's submission, where they said that this is falls really short of the principle of partnership as displayed in the Treaty of Waitangi. And that principle actually talks about partnership or co-management. And the only place where we actually do that right now is in the Regional Planning Committee, because that's specifically designed to meet the terms of the treaty. And that there is a 1-for-1 representation around the table on the environmental future or the plans of this committee. So everybody knew that we would never get a fair deal. It's based on figures. There was only ever going to be 2. So we were steered down that path. But what we weren't steered down is what was going to happen to the Wairoa boundary. And again, I bring up that word gerrymandering is simply tampering with electoral boundaries when there's no need to. I think Will talked about risk earlier. what's the risk of changing the boundary or not changing the boundary? And the reality is there's a risk in changing the boundary, a risk that we don't need to take. Not right now. The whole idea of Māori seats is that they have a review period. And this next triennium or the next two should be part of that review. Because there's a lot of things that still have to be undertaken. A lot of people are trapped in one role or another, either the Māori role or the general role, and they can't change for another few more years. So I can't see the sense in tampering with something that's not quite broken until everyone has a fair opportunity to change that role or not. And I also think that the process didn't actually take into account all those people that are eligible to vote in the Hawke's Bay Regional Council District that own land in Hawke's Bay. And so we have an amount of figures who are currently on the electoral roll, but that only applies to those on the electoral roll now, but not those that live outside the district and may have an influence on the vote if they only knew that they could have an influence. So I think with the process, it does have a couple of flaws in it. I'm looking at the last paper we've got now, and it talks about a lot of figures from different parts of the country. One that interests me is the one from Southland, which has 102,000 people and has 9 councillors. And I see a lot of our constituents also said, we don't want to see an increase in councillors. So obviously business as usual is buggers up their rates. They've got that feeling that it might interfere with their rate payment. And I also noticed one of the submissions actually had a good idea. And why don't we just stay at 9? But we just adjust the 7 for the local constituents and still have 2 Māori seats. And what that's told me is that anything's possible, but all those possibilities weren't actually put in as options. So I think we were steered down the path of this is what's expected of the government. One of the things that's clearly in there also is that subsection 2 tells us the rules on how to set up an election. But subsection 3 gives you an out if it becomes too tricky or difficult. And I noticed that this consultation is about figures. It's purely a mathematical equation, when actually we're talking about people. And section 3 gives you that view that actually, if it's about people, this is what you can do. Now I look around the table, 3 people from Heathertonga, 3 from Napier, 3 independents. If you're saying that we have the right to talk about our own district more, then actually we're up against it, because I've got to vote against 3 people, 2 groups of 3 who are together. I mean, the only fair deal is if I vote off with him, because it affects his boundary as well. Or that we take more weighting towards all the voices we heard from Wairoa that come up for the submissions. And there were lots. The spoken person, and there weren't, I don't think I saw anybody who spoke against it. But the ones that come up from Wairoa put their best foot forward and put options, and I think that we all heard the cry, whatever they said, it all amounted to the current situation is not broken. Let's move on and just see what happens. Just let it go until this Māori ward thing is settled. And because that's the real issue. It's supposed to be the real issue, but somehow it's the Wairoa boundary is now the issue. And that was never intended. And I think if we and the process also highlighted a lot of inequities for the Wairoa district. It was brought up by quite a few people, and those need to be taken into consideration. I don't know if you've lived there, but yeah, we're actually on the boundary between the East Coast and Hawke's Bay. So half of our services come from Gisborne, and the other half are from down here. But at least with the regional council, they had a face-to-face ability. They might not. The risk is quite great here, as opposed to no risk. if we voted the other way. So I just think, yeah, I was elected by the Wairau people to vote for Wairau, so I'll be voting for Wairau today.
Thank you, Charlie. Anyway? Craig?
Thanks, Chair. Actually, Chair, at this moment I wish I could speak to Rao, because the issues in and around Māori wards, which was very testing for our council, it shouldn't have been as much as it was, but it was. Late last year, then a good process was followed, and we unanimously voted for the expectation of probably 2 Māori wards, and I congratulate and very proud to be part of the council that achieved that and did that. And then at that very moment, other decisions needed to be made, because that affected the wards and the population makeup in every other ward. So before we even have Māori councillors around this table representing those 2 wards, they have been very influential, even before they're elected. Mr. Chair, I am very frustrated by this process. I think it's a very much a missed opportunity to have a look across our entire region at the makeup of our various wards. I note and admire what Hastings District Council have done, who have had a similar challenging space and challenged a few issues, and by and large probably have landed in what's an acceptable space for the general public. As we see in the paper, Mr. Chair, that and just a caveat, I hugely admire Mayor Craig Little. Very few areas or towns or cities have such a strong advocate for themselves. If I was in his shoes, I would be saying exactly what he is saying, and to some of his colleagues, and as Fenton and some other submitters would say. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely respect that. But from the other side of that fence, there's another fairness argument. So for every piece of logic which is actually used in this paper to describe areas of interest, constituencies, what seems to be an underlying assumption that a councillor should live in the constituency that they are voted in on, is contradicted elsewhere in the paper, or pragmatically, for example, around this table, where not only the 3 Hastings councillors do not currently live in the constituency of Hastings, neither did our recent election for Rex's vacancy, neither of the 2 candidates lived in Hastings. And one of them, as a previous councillor, never lived in Hastings. Didn't mean that person didn't represent that area very, very well in their time. Mr. Chair, I think there's so much more analysis that needs to be done. For example, if we apply some of the thinking in and around the arguments for why some of the boundaries should be at Esk or Tutera or not at all, if we actually apply those to the Māori seats conversation, well, a lot of work's gone on there. Where should that boundary be? Some hard decisions have obviously been made to come to a 10.66 tolerance just outside the regulatory threshold. Well, that sets a great example of what we need to be doing with our various other wards. And so that has led the example, but sadly it hasn't been followed through on. For example, Clive is in the Naroro seat. I live in the Naroro seat. I live at Waimarama. I could make arguments that we have much in common with other areas, potentially Hastings, potentially Wairau actually, or potentially Central Hawke's Bay. So, Mr. Chair, I totally reject some of the assumptions of the paper. Finally, Mr. Chair, I do have a very strong faith in democracy. I have the faith in the people will make the right decisions at the end of the day, those that choose to participate and that choose to vote. I acknowledge and thank you those that took time to submit on the original Māori seats discussion that we had and this submission, even though there may be 32, 34 or 36 of them. It takes time to do that, and I very much appreciate their participation. I don't think there's too much to be afraid of, regardless of what's landed today on the various recommendations. All councillors do arrive once they get around this table and have a pure and absolute focus on a better environment. That's a good thing for Hawke's Bay. I flag, Mr. Chair, that I will be voting for some of the recommendations, abstaining and potentially voting against some of the others.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hope this is going.
Yep.
Look, I really have a lot of sentiment for the comments that have been made so far, especially in regards to the outcomes that we've seen as a result of establishing Māori wards. So first and foremost, really did want to recognise councillors for your decision early in November last November. Yeah, it was November last year. So well done, and especially it's been for the decision that you made. One thing I do take on board, and I thought about this on driving over here this morning. So we had local government, especially our Minister, Mahuta, who made the changes in regards to the Act to make provision for the establishment of Māori wards. But there was no other changes to that Act in regards to the structure that was put in place around that. So the structure remained the same. And so we've seen that actually played out now in regards to the formulation of wards in general around the thing 10% either way. The remuneration has played a part in some of these conversations, and that there was no recognition that the number of councillors may increase, but remuneration levels were left the same. Hence that put pressure back on councillors around making their decisions. The other thing that stuck in my mind as I was driving over, my mind went back to the Māori Fisheries Act 2004 and how Māori had to come to settlement in regards to that particular piece of legislation. And we used the formula of population and coastline to reach settlement. Because if we just use population, there was disparities in regards to various iwi. And so we used the formula of coastline to give balance to that settlement. And what I see here and have heard here this morning was in regards to the likes of Wairoa Central, who have a significant geographical area to cover with a single councillor. Then I come across to Ahuriri, a very small geographical area, but has 3 councillors. Same again for Hastings. So for me, going forward and looking at reviewing, because at some stage we have to review this, I think there has to be a balance struck, not only around population, but also around geographical area that councillors are expected to cover. Yes, we can talk about where someone lives. So I might start off living in Hastings and next week I suddenly live in Waimarama. Should I still continue to represent Heretaunga? You can always have those discussions. They'll never ever go away. But at the end of the day, it is about how do we get fair representation to the constituency, not only by population, but also by geographical position, and ensuring that there is fair representation, not only for their population, but in regards to those that are representing that area. To ask one councillor to represent what is proposed to be the Wairoa stroke Estale constituency, it's a hell of an ask. And then I look at what's going to be asked of those Māori councillors who are successful with the Māori wards. Equally, the ask on them to cover off and give good coverage, to fulfil their roles to the best of their abilities over such a wide extent, is actually, to me, is bordering on the bounds of impossibility. Because that's almost a full 1.5 full-time position we're asking them to do. And is it really realistic that someone should be asked to do that? And those are my concerns, Mr. Chairman. But once again, I do ask is that we do not use the establishment of Māori wards to actually raise the other issues. So I don't think that's particularly fair. for Māori or for those Māori wards. After waiting 181 years, suddenly we're seen as the fly in the ointment because Māori wards were established. I think the issues were already there. Māori wards just actually highlighted them. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you. Kia ora. Just conscious of time, team. Councillor Curtin.
I'll wait for the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief and foreshadow much of what I wanted to say on the one specific motion that's of contention, really. Just reflecting back on the process, the boundary that we have changed is between the treaty partner being securely represented at this table and not. That's the Rubicon we've crossed. And in my view, it would be a great tragedy if the price of crossing that Rubicon was the loss of effective representation for any part of the region, and ironically precisely where the percentage participation on the Maori roll is the very highest. My learnings in this process, including from hearing from my colleagues, particularly those representing rural constituencies, is that the issues we face are more important than the numbers, and the burden on councillors lies not on the numbers of ratepayers they represent, but on the environmental issues which their constituency reveal. And those are driven, as Mike has just shared, by geographical area. So I think that foreshadows where I'm going to be landing on the boundary issue. And I do note one further thing, that there was a recent backtrack by the Commission where they included Central Hawke's Bay on the numbers basis. Part of Hastings was swept into it, and they realised that, sorry, that's just a different community, and they took it back out again. And I don't think we should make that same mistake. Having reflected on the submissions, I'd be minded to modify a notified proposal accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the wall quickly if I can. Michelle, have you got some questions, some comments you'd like to make?
Kia ora koutou. I've been listening with interest to everybody's comments and tautoko, what you've just said, Martin and Mike. I haven't got much to add. Why there was a community of interest, and it's almost it's unfortunate that the Maori constituency kōrero has been overshadowed with the general constituency kōrero. And considering the milestone that we've achieved and how things have changed, the ahua, the wairua in our hui now are much better. So yes, looking forward to the final resolution. And yeah, just to add that. There probably was less talk about the Maori constituency, especially the northern seat, and I did bring it up multiple times, but we've got nearly 750,000 hectares to have to cover. Again, multiple iwi, hundreds of hapu, and there's an argument over the general seat. I'd like to see the Wairoa seat stay the same as well, and it's true, it's about the environment and the land mass. In our area, the Federated Farmers submitter spoke about, I hope there is a rural councillor, a farmer in the mix with our ones, and with 60% of the land in Wairoa being owned by Māori corporations, there's a good chance that one of us will be in there. So. But yeah, again, congratulate you on your previous decision. Look forward to the final resolution, and tautoko, us staying as our community of interest, very much like the Tamatea seat, the Central Space seat, and kia ora. Thank you.
Api, last one.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa o ngā rangatira o te tipu nei. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm straightforward, and I'm going to be a little bit on an outlier with some of my whakaaro. It's interesting participating in this journey. I see a very distinct difference between representation and participation. So this for me and the conversations I've had within the constituencies was about representation. The decision by the collective councillors at the table has enabled representation at this table in 2023. And so there are a couple of nuances within this process that I think I can pick up that we're struggling with. One is that the acts by which define this process are not rich enough in their understanding of our communities, of the differences in those Māori and non-Māori roles. The Act is pretty narrow in its application. And so to the staff of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, I have followed the process and I wish to acknowledge the work that the staff have done in this space. They have followed diligently a process that I'm not particularly fond of and I see a whole lot of flaws in, but it's nonetheless a part of the democratic process. And so to the staff of HBRC, well done on a very difficult task. I see a difference between ratepayers and a Māori perspective being represented at the table. I own land within the constituencies that you govern, and as a ratepayer, I have the ability to participate in that space. But your decision to enable representation on the table was not for me as a ratepayer. Your decision to enable Māori at the table was to have my worldview represented in your decision making, which is very different to the piece of land with a defined boundary around it. And so there is no precedent for Hawke's Bay Regional Council in this space. This is a new extension of democracy in your room. There will be new people at your table who will bring new perspectives and fresh insights with a focus on Te Ao Māori. So from my perspective, I see no conflict or any challenge going forward other than the fact that I recognise democracy will change and evolve as we become more familiar with the dynamics of how this new space will work for us all. Also, as a Māori, that perspective at your table is not bound by a geographical line on a map. I may need to seek, if I was elected to represent Māori in this space, I may need to seek a Te Ao Māori perspective from someone who resides outside the boundary in order to bring that perspective to this table and share it with those on the Māori role who are wanting to participate in this process. So for me, participation and representation are two very, very different things. We still do not fully understand what the participation side of things will be like. I echo the concerns around the size of the catchment, the task ahead, and all of the indicators from central government suggest that that slope is only going to get steeper. So from my perspective, we are walking into new territory as a council, but we are defining those steps by the limitations of an act which doesn't understand the complexities of our world. So I invite you to continue with your conversations. I'm appreciative of this opportunity, but I'm also cognizant of the chair's comments that this will eventually sit with another desk to make a final decision. And as iwi and as Māori, we may too take up that democratic option to express our concerns there. With regards to the boundary changes, it was interesting conversations in a catchment by catchment space. I really, really struggle with the connection, as Councillor Lambert has indicated, with the connection between representation and the change of those boundaries. A very strong, clear message came from the community of interest in this regard, Māori, and in their expression, they seek 2 wards without a move of the boundary. That was the majority of the voice that I picked up. I am not necessarily a great fan, personally, of the 2 boundaries. But I vote in support of those comments from my community because we are familiar with the democratic system in its current state. New seats are being made available for Māori to bring that whakaaro, that thinking, that insight to the table. And so, where was I going with that thought? Boundaries and wards.
Keep up. You're going to the mountaintop.
Yeah, well, I don't see that. I see it as being hugely problematic. As Councillor Lambert said, it may not be broken and I don't see why we need to fix it. There was an absence of dedicated whakaaro from those areas in between Wairoa and in between Esk who really should have been given an opportunity to have a dedicated consultation on the impacts of their democracy in that space. That's not evident in any of the consultations that I picked up, nor was it alluded to in the conversations from those areas. But what was clear is that at this stage, we don't necessarily see the need to shift those boundaries. This is a new space for Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and like Councillor Lambert said, let's give this a crack in its current form, because we really cannot foresee all of the nuances of this new mechanism until we hit the ground running. And that comes down to that participation in operation. So from my perspective, I support the comments that came from the submitters. 2 ward areas. We're grateful that this council has seen the value of a Māori insight at the table, and we look forward to being welcomed as peers and colleagues into your forum. Until then, we hope that you recognise that Wairoa is a large catchment area, is an area of interest, has communities of interest, has some significant nuances around multiply owned Māori land, underutilised land. And so those are my perspectives on this. I wish you luck as you go forward. The process is flawed. The law is not comprehensive in its understanding of our space and our people. And so it's easy to walk along this pathway from the Crown and under these acts and look to the side of the path and go, well, that looks like a better path. I'd rather do that. We can't. The act is clear. So I wish you luck on your decision, and I hope that it becomes easier as time rolls on.
Thank you. I'll defer my comments to enable the Chief Executive to make a few comments.
Look, thank you, Chair. Just acknowledge Api, and thank you for your acknowledgement of the difficult job that staff have had to do on this. We all acknowledge that the legislation could be improved, and that while these matters do always ignite strong passions in the community, as representation always should, it is a difficult legislative pathway that needs to be followed, as well as a heck of a balancing act of a range of considerations that don't lend themselves to perfect solutions. And I just note, in terms of the governance team's work on this, it did obviously happen alongside an unplanned by-election and also coincide with the conclusion of the long-term plan process. So it has been a big job at a difficult time. And just in passing, I guess I would note that it was asserted that the paper has started with a presumption of elected representatives living within their constituencies. I've just reread the paper 3 times and I can't find any reference to that at all. But what is clear in the paper is that a number of submitters have made the point that proximity to local communities are important. And indeed, the practical challenges for councillors in representing large geographic areas has been pointed out, and I do think that's appropriate. And I do think the people of Wairoa would have concerns about somebody from Parongaho representing them and their ability to service their constituencies in that regard. So I stand by the staff and their comments in the paper, and I think they've done a good job and good service to council. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move to decision making now.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move recommendations 1, 2 and 4.
Could I suggest we do, I want to make a change to 4. I might suggest a change here. So I'd like to take 1 and 2. You move 1 and 2, Councillor Curtin.
Happy to.
Okay, seconder. Councillor Van Beek. Is there any discussion on this? Put the resolution. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. Councillor Curtin, could I ask that you move Councillor recommendation 4 not in the negative, rejects, move it in the positive, affirms Maori place names.
We're delighted to do that, Mr. Chair.
All right, affirm. Would you like to second it, Councillor?
Yeah, what was the word again?
Affirms. So we're affirming our decision.
This is
to employ Māori names.
Yeah.
For the general constituencies.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I just ask that
you can't say through me to Mr. You can't say through me to Mr. Chair. You're talking to me, Mr. Chair.
Chair, sorry. Is it possible to get some words that reflect that we're?
Just the point I was making to you, the resolutions are couched in the negative. So rejects. I'd much rather have the resolution be in the positive. For the council affirms
the names of the general.
The names as.
Yeah.
So the whole line taken out.
So we're doing it in the affirmative rather than the negative. I think it's a better resolution, isn't it?
Yep.
So you're moving that, Councillor?
I'm very happy to do that, Mr Chair.
We have a second for that, Councillor Ormsby. Now, would anybody like to speak?
Yes, I would, Mr Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Chair, one of the things that struck me from the submissions, and I reflected on a comment from my colleague, Councillor Williams, that we had in accepting Māori constituencies and affirming those, we'd crossed a Rubicon. We'd made significant progress. While on one hand I agree and accept that, it was significantly disappointing to me to have read submissions 17 and 30 and the reference by staff to several other submissions expressing opposition to the inclusion of Māori place names in the constituencies we're determined. My point is this. We may have introduced Māori constituencies, but we've got an awful long way to go to ensure that the whole community comes along and appreciates the role Māori play in our community. And if the name of a constituency is of such bother to those people, even though it may be a small group of people, it indicates we've still got a long way to go. And I would suggest that we need to continue the journey, not only in instituting Māori constituencies, but in promoting Te Ao Māori generally. We've got a big journey to make. One of the things that I think ought to be the next consideration is the changing of names of our region and the changing of the names of our cities. When we honour General Napier and General Hastings, and particularly General Clive, colonists from the 19th century, who invaded vast tracts of lands in India, never set foot in New Zealand or Aotearoa, and yet wouldn't even know where it was, and yet they are honoured by in name in our province. I find that extraordinary. When the original inhabitants of the area, their names were superseded. Napier, for example, was Ahuriri up until 1850, and then some bright spark decided to change that.
Not bright sparks, right.
So my point, Mr Chair, in focusing on this particular recommendation is to make that point, that we do have a long way to go, and we can be an architect, if you like, or precipitate that next move beyond Māori constituencies per se, but to introduce a whole new way of engaging with tangata whenua and engaging with the wider public, so that we really truly achieve far greater than a name change or a Māori constituency introduction. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to tautoko Neil's comments, but also thank the councillors, also Michelle and Api, who supported the suggestion when we workshopped a few months ago to have the inclusion, and then it going to Māori Committee and RPC as well for kōrero. But I think it recognises the rich Māori history that still needs to be told. And we had submitters, disappointingly, a few submitters share their points of view. One noting that I can't pronounce these names, so why use them? And I would say to most of the children I interact with, they have no problem pronouncing Māori words. So maybe this is a time for evolution, and maybe this is a time for being far more educated than we have been in the past about our rich history, pre-colonisation. So thank you to our committees and also our councillors for bringing this to the table and offering it to the public to have their views. So very happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. We then come to 5 and 6. This is the line in the sand, and it's either to someone will have to kick the debate off and move the retained Wairoa. 5. You will do so.
Yep. Yes.
And if that fails, then we will have to, by default, I guess, go back and then move that we have the Wairoa Mohaka constituency or some other variation. So we put this one up. So you have a mover for Martin, and do I have a second for that? Councillor Lambert, do you wish to speak?
Very briefly, we notified a proposal. I've listened to submissions, I've reflected on it, and that's where I am now in terms of maintaining the boundary where it is for the reasons I shared earlier. And that's all I really want to say.
Thank you. You got anything further to add to that?
Just to echo the words of the District Council submission, Wairoa is unique and it should stay as such. It's got a lot to offer as it is without changing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other people like to speak on it?
Yes, Mr Chair.
Councillor Curtin.
Mr Chair, I oppose this recommendation. My view is that the submitters have over-egged this. This notion that Wairoa is some sort of narrow fiefdom sort of contained within the little Wairoa Valley. It's much more broader than that. Having lived in that community for 3 years myself, the differences between a resident of Waikato-Morana and Mahia is just as diverse as it would be to Tutira. We've got evidence pointing us clearly in the face that such a small population to be represented is simply beyond the pale. There is a democratic principle at stake. There is no huge difference between the landscape, the land use, the people between Tutira and Mahia. It is not big enough to do that. It is over-egging it to say that representing that constituency is too vast. It's not. We have the example in Central Hawke's Bay, which traverses a similar geography. There's no real reason to be doing this other than the introverted nature of the Mayor of Wairoa to maintaining some sort of fiefdom, when in fact we do need a regional approach. We do need to ensure that our region goes ahead as one, not as Wairoa and the rest. And I reject those arguments, Mr Chair. I believe they were never strong enough to overturn the proportionality that needs to be retained in terms of representation.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, thank you. Look, I will support this motion. Primarily, I look at this and I think, well, what's the best for the HBRC operation and environmental outcomes? And I believe that's best done with local representation up in Wairoa. So for that reason, primarily, I will support this motion.
Any other speakers? Okay. Well, I suggest that we put the motion in. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Clarify which one it is. It's number
It's
number
the
5.
Item 5, that we maintain the Wairoa constituency as previously described. So, all those in favour will say aye.
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 Contrary, no.
No.
Sorry?
Division, I think.
Sorry?
Division.
Excuse me. We're going to now poll councillors. It's not very clear. So I'll ask those who are in favour of the motion to raise your hand. Two, three, 4, 5. Those against? 2, 3, 4. Wairoa stands alone.
Democracy at work, Mr Chair.
Okay, well, that's a big call.
Glad you made it.
Okay, then we move on to item 7, 8. I think it said 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and I just think we should look at item 8. Let's move it that the council reaffirms the retention of 9 councillors.
Oh, no, it's a total.
Yeah, it is total.
It's the wrong one. It's the next one.
So the next one.
Oh, the time, yeah.
You said we out of a job there.
Yeah, man.
No, that's right. No, quite right. I think 9 and 2, but it's 11, yeah. So I think rather rejects, the council affirms the retention of 11 councillors, 9 and 2, as detailed in the original proposal. Someone would like to move that? Councillor Foley? Councillor Foss? Pretty clear on that, aren't we? Yep. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. We then move on to the next is the 11, 12 and 13.
It's the Ahariri one. Do we have to knock that out, or is that
We've done that by having the 11.
By doing 9.
That paper says and, not or. It says 9 and 10. So we haven't addressed 10 yet. I know it does knock it out. The word should say or something.
No, by having the thing of 9 councillors for a total, it would be 11 as detailed. So it's 9 councillors and 2 Maori constituencies.
Yeah.
So that's the one we've done. And so by affirming 9, 10 is rejected because it's a separate conflicting resolution.
Out of order then is what you're saying.
Out of order, yeah. If you vote for one, you can't go.
No, it just doesn't read like that.
And that was the challenge in trying to construct these. We went round in circles trying to construct these regs, but because they flow into each other, it's very hard to
But so once you vote on one thing and there's something inconsistent with it,
no problem with it.
Yeah.
I was trying to look at that myself.
So we've got clear decision. So we're having 9 and 2, that's 11. Then come to 11, 12 and 13. We affirm those.
Down to 13.6.
13.6.
And include 13.8 but not 13.7.
So 13.6, take out 13.7 and 13.8. So would someone move that?
Move.
Martin? Charles?
Seconding.
You'll support this, trust me.
Might as well go and have your lunch, mate. He'll vote
No,
for
just
you.
say this is exactly what you wanted. Exactly.
Point of order, Chairman, though, the trouble is if we move 7 with all of the others, or 8, we're going to have everyone in line with 11, 12, 13 to 13.6, but we're going to have the same division on 13.8.
So
but I'm happy to move, but it's just going to make the voting tricky.
What's the difference in 13.7 or 13.8 other than the name?
One's keeping the boundary where it is, and one's
13.7, one member elected by.
It's just a sort of, I piloted this as well myself, but it just seemed to me it was a resolution to tie all these things up into one neat bundle. That's what it was. I see that because according with 19HJ, got that. According with 19HJ, these elections set out what they are according to those. So we've got them all in one bundle. That's as I saw those. That what this resolution was trying to do?
sorry, Chair. So look, 13.7 and 13.8 relate to obviously the proposed shift in the boundary, which
we've already decided.
Which you've already decided on. So it is the name should remain Wairoa, and 13.8 would stand. I guess the point that I think I heard around the table is, given there was a division on the last one, there may be a desire to take those two 13.7 and 13.8 separately and vote on them separately. But if having the substantive issue having been lost,
we don't want to do. We don't want to do that. We just want to. As I see, this is basically procedural. That's all this is.
Oh, I see.
We made the substantive decision. This is tying it all up and things. That's how I see it. It's a procedural motion. So Martin's moved. Charles has seconded the resolution 11, 12, 13 to 13.6 and including 13.8. All right. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. We don't need any other resolutions then, I take it, until we get down to, sorry,
14.
14? Why do we need 14?
The names?
Apparently we need all of them.
The recommendation.
But hang on, we have, in 13.1.
So that wasn't
two,
the name, that was the number of councillors for the constituency.
But we've got the name in there.
No, Chair. So again, this is a sequencing issue. You could have adopted the name before you adopted allocating councillors to the constituency, but it's chicken and egg. So.
Well, we've got here, we've agreed to elect a member by Maori ki te raki.
Yes.
So we've done that. So why do we have to go back and say the name again?
Well, if it's all about time and it's no harm.
Okay, right, let's do 14.
I agree.
I'll move 14, Mr Chair.
14, thank you.
I'll second that.
Do we need 15 as well or not?
No.
15?
Yes, that definitely needs.
15.
Sorry, Chair, I'm going to be voting separately on 14 and 16.
14 and 16?
Oh, sorry, you're talking 15, aren't you? Sorry.
Let's take 14.
14, all right, we've got Councillor Curtin's moved 14. Have a seconder.
Yep.
Councillor Foley on 14, 1 and 2. All those in favour will say aye.
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 Contrary, no. Carried. We then, item 15. Do we need to pass that?
Yes.
Is that a requirement?
Yes.
Okay, was someone going to move that?
I'll move it.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Van Beek. No speeches. I'll then move it. Those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no.
Big mistake.
Carried. 16.
Did Councillor Foster, do you want that recorded?
No, I voted as the positive for 15.
Oh.
That's the one about the Maori constituency.
No.
16, Craig was raising.
Oh, I'm abstaining for the one that begins 5 general constituencies. I'll be abstaining pretty much from here on out.
Okay.
Everything about the Maori seats, I'm voting in favour.
All right, so we now got to 16. 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's my screen's frozen. 16.6 to be consistent.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll move that.
Councillor Williams, do I have a seconder? Councillor Ormsby. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no.
No.
Abstention.
One.
Got one carried, not unanimous. It's simply carried with an abstention.
Recorded, please.
Recorded. Now so that's down to now notes. We need 17 and 18 to be resolved as well. Right. I'll move 17 and 18. Let's do something.
I'll be abstaining 17 but voting for 18.
Okay, I'll move 17 separately. Do I have a seconder for 17?
Okay. I'll second it just to.
Councillor
move things
Williams,
along.
all right. I'll put the question. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no.
No. Huge mistake.
Abstain.
One abstain, record, please.
One abstention recorded. And I'll move 18. Martin, Councillor Foss will support second 18. I'll move 18. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Abstentions. Carried unanimously. Right.
Chair, before we finish that up, could I ask our Māori committee members and RPC members about the naming of our Māori constituencies? Or sorry, Pierre?
So earlier council resolved that so the task that we received from council was to engage kaumātua in those respective areas. We did. There were 2 meetings, one during the day, one during the evening to accommodate their being able to participate. There were lots of names that were put forward, and in particular from Hineuru, they were looking for something that more representative of Te Puku as opposed to Te Matau, which is more coastal. But in the end, they all resolved and recommended that we move to Maui ki te raki, which is to the northern end, and Maui ki te tonga to the southern end. That was a happy balance for all. That was recommendation to this council committee.
If I could just further add, just in regards to that. So as Peter said, a number of names come through, 2 names. And it put into a particular area, which of course doesn't always cover everybody. Whereas Maori, going back to our ancestor, Maori Tikitia, I think, Tānaka, incorporates all of us. And so therefore no one was left out. Sure.
Thank you.
Including non-Maori.
I just wonder whether we should break now and have lunch. And just note that the time allocated for this discussion was 30 minutes, which I thought was a heroic assumption, given the contentiousness of it and the number of speakers that are going to be on for it. So I also want to congratulate councillors for the way in which they conducted the debate. It was outstanding, free and frank, good discussion. I think at the end of it we can all say we've made a robust decision. Whether we agree with it or not, we've made a robust decision and we'll get on with it. And there's nothing perfect in this life. What we've got. It'll be a road test at the next election or two, and I take up his point, it will evolve, I've no doubt about that. So we made a step on a path, and I'm very grateful for that. A long time coming.
Chair, can I just apologise? I'd just like to apologise to the CEO and your staff. I wasn't meaning to imply, I think I did in my commentary about the underlying assumption in the paper. That's not what I actually meant. I asked the question earlier and I reject any assumption, but I apologise because I think that did come across like that. I wasn't asserting that from you or the staff.
Well, we'll have to find a suitable task for you to take as a sort of a expression of your apology. Sure.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I'm going to have to, because I'm going to a nehu, so I won't be here after the lunch.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay.
So,
Thank you very much, Councillor.
So, look, we've got guests coming in for a workshop discussion at 1:30. We've also got Mr. Druzianic here and the chair of the port waiting for the PE discussion around that port director appointments. I'm wondering if we could keep lunch to 15 minutes.
Oh, you got a break my arm. Well, it's 15 minutes lunch. Yeah. My ancestors went on strike over a 15-minute lunch. Let me tell you that.
The afternoon's going to get backed up.
Yes.
Is that reasonable?
We'll make this a one-off exception. You've used your chip on this one, James. Don't come back to it again.
Thank you.
We resume at 1:15. And confirmations. The paper's been circulated. I don't think we need to discuss it. It's very clear.
Two, three, 5, 6.
Yeah. Yes, so Councillor Foss, would you clear the move?
Yes, I will.
And I'll have your sidekick, Councillor Curtin.
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, I move the resolution. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no, carried. Fixing the common seal, I'll move that. Councillor Foley will follow. Second that.
Second.
All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no, carried. Information, performance and monitoring. We've got quite a debate coming up with that. This is a pretty pro forma report on Clifton to Tangoyo. So would someone care to move? Van Bake will move the receipt of the summary.
Shall move to?
I'll second it.
Yep.
All right. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Councillors' reports. Have we got any councillors' reports people would like to raise? In the interest of time, I think we should just box on and put that aside. Then we come to matters, minor items not on the agenda. And we'll do Councillor Williams is first up on comms.
Very briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a big shout out to the communications team. It gave me great joy after a day at the coalface to come home and find in the middle of the paper this spread last week on water. A lot of talk about water. I know people say we should be, and we do, engage in the social media platforms, but I thought for a full page spread in the Hawke's Bay today, for whatever reach it has, that was a very clear, focused, helpful, relevant, important set of information on everything that matters about, awa and why. So I just thought it was brilliant, and it showed that in fact, if you are concerned about your rates bills, it is going to the right places. It does reveal that to our communities, and I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you.
Wow.
Something about council.
I want more talking points like that. So, next one, Peka. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Chair. First, I better point out that we have at least one fan watching us online and swiftly told me off for naming Peka swamp and not wetlands. But in my defence, I am referring to something that happened some time ago. So, Ian, before you walk out, just had a request from a concerned resident, if you like, that drives past that area every day or nearly every day, that apparently quite a few years back, a lot of money and resource was put into eradicating pussy willow in that area, and just concerned about the evidence of it starting to come back. So sorry, was I meant to be directing that at Chris. So just point that out and look to a follow-up on what we might be able to do, if not already addressing that.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Charles, multi-owned land.
Yes, Mr. Chair. As you know, I have brought it up a number of times about how multiple owned land is, from what I've heard, only the top person on each list can vote. And there's a hangover from the days when people thought of Queen Street farmers as just businesses and investors in the areas, and they don't have a great depth for the local environment and the local happenings of councils and things. But I've since talked to someone the other day and he goes, no, as long as you own land and have ownership in land in the district, you are eligible to vote, you just have to apply. So I said, well, where does it say that? He goes, you're on the council, go and ask the council. And I was like, well, that's a brilliant idea. If I could find out, obviously from Leanne's the obvious one I can think of, as to how we manage it here at the Hawke's Bay Regional Council elections.
Sure. That's a point to note. We'll see if we can get some advice on who's entitled to vote on multiple owned land. To be some pretty...
treat that as a follow-up.
Treat that as a follow-up. Thank you very much. Okay, would someone like to move that we go into public excluded, and that we include in the meeting for the public excluded the chair and of ACEBRIC and the chair of the Napier Board.
To move.
Councillor Ormsby, Councillor Van Beek. Put the question. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
No. Carried. Okay.